Perhaps one of the most useful ways to combine everything we've talked about so far is the idea of patterns. A pattern is a way to represent a specific sequence. Using names, my name is Tyler. Tyler is a specific pattern from the concept of names, and names in turn was a type of sequence made from the set of letters. Before we had Steve, which was one specific sequence, otherwise known now as a pattern. Tyler is another specific sequence from names, now known as a pattern. This is the next stage of our discovery. First, there was information. So we had little information blocks. Then there were sets that the information belonged to, in this case, colors. Then there were sequences where we would have a specific and ordered arrangement of information that was all related to one another. Then, now, we have patterns. However, each stage has brought with it new capabilities. Patterns are the stage where these capabilities explode. Consider this. When I was talking about information in sets, that was kind of abstract, a little bit philosophical, hard to follow. Nobody wants to deal with everything in the scope of pure information. Patterns, though, are at a level where we can still express really powerful ideas, but in a more common way of speaking. Patterns also have a best friend called rules. More on them later, though. They deserve a whole video all to themselves, so that's coming up next. But we can't talk about patterns without talking about rules a little bit. They do go hand in hand. Patterns are capable of expressing really unique or infinite sequences. Rules are the language that are used to make those kinds of patterns. So patterns can be unique, like my name, or they can be arbitrary and naturally defined, kind of like what we talked about with information and sequences earlier. Patterns can be all the different types of earlier information, but just a little bit more. The true power of patterns, however, is what we need to talk about now. This is what makes patterns stand out, and it's the reason why I'm going to be frequently exploring topics in the terms of patterns. Patterns can connect to each other. Let me say that again, because this will let us do whatever we want. Patterns can connect to each other. Okay, what the heck does that mean? It means that two separate patterns, remember the pattern of TYLER and a pattern of just these colors in this order, can be connected to each other. Even if they have separate types of information, they can be connected. And there's a lot of freedom in how we do this thanks to rules. A rule is like the glue that binds two different patterns together. The better the rules, the better the glue, and the more fascinating ways we can connect patterns together. The importance of being able to connect patterns comes from the fact that some patterns are extremely complicated, while other patterns are more simple. Using a rule, I can say that this pattern, red, blue, repeating infinitely, is the same as this pattern, which I ran out of blocks for, but is just red and blue repeating infinitely. A simple pattern instead of this really long, complicated pattern. But they're the same thing. Also, some patterns deal with technical information, which we already discussed is a little bit more tedious and difficult to learn, while others deal with fundamental or standard information. We combine those two together, and this will let us use a simple, fundamental pattern to express a more complicated technical pattern. All we need is the rules to connect the two. Let's do a quick example. Let's use the numbers 1, 2, and 3 to connect the patterns of three different, let's say, these are people, little block people. I can connect 1 to green and 2 to yellow and 3 to blue. Now, instead of actually having to refer to this specific block, or this specific block, I'm able to refer to green as 1 or yellow as 2. Everyone has a unique number, And this is going to be useful if I wanted to create employee numbers, team designation, roll call, anything really. It's easier to work with the numbers than it is to work with the actual individual blocks. That's kind of a little bit basic. Let's work with something that you are probably familiar with. So this will be a better example that really shows off the use of patterns. Let's create the rule, and we're going to consider the number 0 to represent no blocks on a plate. And we'll use the number 255 to represent a full amount of red blocks on a plate. Then, using this number as a sort of dial, you can imagine that, you start at 0 and I turn this and can go up to 255. Using that as a dial, I can go from 0 and start to increase and get a little bit more. And about halfway there, I have half the blocks. I go a little bit more, and then I'm at full. I'm at 255, so that represents a full plate of blocks. It's a lot easier to change this number than it would be to actually mess with this plate every time. If I could make it magically change as I turned this dial, well then I could very easily control the number of blocks on this plate. This is actually how RGB lights work. All three colors, red, green, and blue, have their own color value between 0 and 255. And as you change that value, it changes the light coming out of your monitor. And you can mix them, so there's so many combinations. And it's a lot easier to change those numbers than to try to mess with the lights inside of your monitor every time you want to change them. And that's why using numbers, your computer is able to store a whole movie on just a file. And it just plays those numbers relating to your monitor to change them from frame to frame. There's going to be a lot more to discuss about patterns and rules, but a lot of it should come from actual examples, preferably even making a little light, like I just suggested. I can only express how important this concept is in words. I want to be much more representative of the power to use it in the ways that let us accomplish amazing feats. So as I go forward and start to get into some topics like computer science, I will typically frame my discussion in the form of patterns and rules. I can't wait to see just how much our skills improve from here.